Well, so they have gotten their war, and I think that this tweet exchange between Tulsi Gabbard and Marco Rubio, really Rubio quoting Gabbard and responding to her, it sort of encapsulates the two different approaches to this conflict. So, if you haven't heard, earlier today, or well, technically today, Russia invaded Ukraine beyond just the eastern parts of Ukraine that are separatist republics, Donetsk and Lugansk. They also invaded or at least attacked some of the core cities of Ukraine, such as Odessa, Kiev, and Kharkiv. And it looks like we're in for a real hot war. Um, this is what Tulsi Gabbard said. This war and suffering could have easily been avoided if the Biden administration and NATO had simply acknowledged Russia's legitimate security concerns regarding Ukraine's becoming a member of NATO, which would mean U.S. and NATO forces right on Russia's border. So Marco Rubio responded saying, I've seen this argument below in various places, and it's simply not true. A pledge that Ukraine would never join NATO was not Putin's only demand. As recently as last week, he once again demanded NATO leave every country that joined after 1997, including Bulgaria, Romania, and 12 others. So, how do we sort of neatly digest both of these tendencies? Okay, on the one hand, Rubio clearly is a war hawk. He's always supported U.S. intervention in Eastern Europe, and Tulsi Gabbard has always been generally a dove. Even some would say an isolationist. I don't really like to use that term, but in this case, it could be appropriate. Um, Saying that the U.S. shouldn't be involved in these theaters, and I tend to be a little bit more to Tulsi Gabbard's side. The one area where I think we have to largely acknowledge a fact is that I can't really justify the Russian invasion no matter what anybody says. And there are people who call themselves members of the anti imperialist left, or they're national populists, or, um, real libertarians, they call themselves, right? And they want to say, well, really, it's Putin who is asserting Russia's proper place in the world, and they try to justify it or whatever. No, I don't think that there is a justification when you invade another sovereign state and its acknowledged borders. It is an invasion. Now, uh, whether the U.S. should be involved directly is a different matter. And I think that the extent that we should have been involved throughout the past 20 to 30 years is in mediating between Ukraine and Russia and trying to find an acceptable solution. And the one thing that I think is the real problem is that what Rubio is talking about is already a done deal. Okay, those countries, Bulgaria, Romania, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, I think Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and a few other countries in the Balkans. Those are all NATO partners that used to be Eastern European states that in some cases were members of the Soviet Union or members of the pro Soviet Warsaw Pact or other communist states like Yugoslavia. And now a lot of them are part of NATO. And that really is the problem that has brought us up to this point. After the Cold War ended, we had the opportunity to either disband NATO or limit it to simply common defense interests of the states that were in Western Europe that had been in it in the Cold War. The states that were part of Eastern Europe, the states like Poland and Czechoslovakia, if they had a common interest in supporting each other to defend against Russia, they could have formed their own group of nations and said, look, we have a common defense. We're not part of NATO. We just don't want Russia to be rushing in here, no pun intended, and dominating us as they did in during the Cold War in incidents like the 1956 invasion of Hungary, the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia. Those are things that they could have done, and I think it would have perhaps avoided this situation. Not for sure. Um, the fact is that after the Cold War ended, NATO expanded a lot, and they expanded their mission. without any recognition of the reality that we could have just let well enough alone and tried to cooperate with Russia on areas of common interest and sort of confront them where we had areas of friction. And creating more areas of friction, which is exactly what admitting more states into NATO did, is something that I think brought us to this moment. And once again, it does not justify anything that's going on in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine specifically. But we have to sort of look at how we got here and wonder how we're going to get out of it. I do believe that the Russians will probably succeed in attaining most of their goals. Now, this is not actually an accurate map of what's been happening yet, to my knowledge. I think that this actual map was sort of a prediction, but I think it could follow this course. You would have Russian troops invading the eastern part of Ukraine. You see over here on the eastern side of the Dnieper River, and also invading from Belarus, which is a Russian ally, part of the Central States Treaty Organization, which is the pro-Moscow counterpart to NATO. So a few Central Asian states like Kazakhstan are part of that, as well as Belarus. And I think maybe Armenia. I might be mistaken. In any case, so you have Crimea, which is an excellent area to start an invasion. And the Russians could basically isolate Ukraine over the course of a few days and seal it off from the Black Sea, such that the only open border that they would have with friendly countries would be through Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary over here. And by seizing the area around Kiev and strangling it, they could force either President Zelensky of Ukraine to yield and say, yes, I will do whatever Russia needs. At the moment, Russia is saying that they are going to disarm Ukraine because it poses a threat to the territorial integrity of the two supposed states that are on the eastern frontier of Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk. It says that Ukraine is posing a threat to their independence. Now, this is without supporting U.S. intervention there. This is bullshit because there's never been a nation called Luhansk. There's never been a nation called Donetsk. Those are merely parts of Ukraine that are primarily populated by Russian-speaking citizens. I don't think that there is necessarily a tremendous difference between Ukrainian and Russian peoples. Sue me if you have a problem with that. But by the same token, those two so-called countries that Russia recently acknowledged are independent, they're bullshit. Like this is just a ploy that Russia's used before to have breakaway republics that would basically expand its sphere of influence. So don't misconstrue this video as in any way supporting what Russia is doing. You can actually see this is an area called Transnistria, which is in Moldova, but it's also a similar republic established to support Russia many years ago. So I actually did hear a report that Russian troops invaded from there as well. So basically, that's one possibility, that Ukraine could become a country that is completely subservient to Russia with the current President Zelensky. Another possibility is that they could chase Zelensky away and install their own puppet president, somebody like Viktor Yanukovych, who was their former president. Those possibilities are alive, and I think that this is another show of how the Biden administration, for all its talk of how they would stand up to Putin and they would do everything they could to stop him, and that Trump was weak and that he was Putin's puppy, we're seeing that was all talk, it was all rhetoric, that in reality whatever you thought about President Trump, and there were many flaws with the way that he did things, and I think even with his statements tonight, everything that Biden has touched has turned into a disaster. He's like they call it the Bitus touch on the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. That everything he touches turns to shit. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can find me on all of these other platforms. You can see here Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute, YouTube, Podbean, Gab, Minds, Substack, Telegram, and Getter. Have a great night, and hope you wake up in peace.